Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, RO DBT and the Polyvagal Theory Controversy, Setting the Record Straight. My name is Erica Smith-Lynch, and I'm joined by my co-director at RO DBT, Roelie Hempel. Okay, who are we? All right, I'm the Director of Treatment Development and Training at Radically Open, and I've been involved in the development of RO DBT since 2008, and I've got a lot of experience working alongside Professor Lynch, mainly because he's my husband. I can't get away from him. And I oversee the RO Scholar, Supervisor and Trainer program, ensuring that our trainers deliver high-quality training and supervision. I'm delighted today to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Roelie Hempel, who is the Director of Dissemination and Continuing Education at Radically Open. And I think that her experience is particularly relevant for our webinar today. Roelie has a PhD in psychology from Erasmus University in Rotterdam, where she specialized in looking at how schizophrenia patients respond emotionally and physiologically to emotionally evocative stimuli. Her research used measures like heart rate, skin conductance, and blood pressure to study their autonomic nervous system reactions to threatening, calming, and rewarding images. So she's our in-house expert at psychophysiology. So for those of you that need a little bit of help, as I do sometimes, psychophysiology is a study of the relationship between physiological and psychological phenomena. In other words, the way in which the mind and body interact. And maybe just as a little closing remark, before Roelie joined alongside me to create the company, the training company that we have here, she was in charge of the biobehavioral laboratory for Dr. Lynch at the University of Exeter and then the University of Southampton. So we've got a real expert on our hands here. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Roelie. Take it away.
Okay, well, thanks, Erica, for that nice introduction. What this video covers. We're first, we'll also explain why we are making this video, and we'll talk about the mischaracterization around RO DBT and polyvagal theory and our response. I'll explain a little bit about the polyvagal controversy that Grossman and colleagues have argued in their very recent paper that's just come out a couple of weeks ago. And then we'll go into what RO DBT is actually based on. And I'll tell you a little bit about the neuroregulatory model and RO DBT's key mechanism of change. We'll also show you how often the polyvagal terminology turns up in both the books, the textbook and the skills manual. Finally, we also explain what it means in practice, what changes, what stays the same, and what to say when maybe you are challenged on RO DBT and polyvagal theory. So let's start with part one, why we are making this video. So the paper I just mentioned is a significant scientific paper by Grossman and his colleagues. And it was signed, co-authored by 39 leading vagal neurophysiology researchers. And it has challenged certain elements of polyvagal theory. And we will discuss these in detail later. But if you only have 60 seconds to watch this video, here are the problem and our response in a nutshell. The problem. Some prominent voices in the field have described RO DBT as based on polyvagal theory, implying that if polyvagal theory falls, RO DBT falls with it. Here's our response. This characterization is inaccurate. RO DBT does not rely on polyvagal theory. RO DBT's key mechanism of change is through improving social signaling. And RO DBT is supported by multiple randomized and other clinical trials. And in 2024, there was actually a review written by Hatum and Burton. And since then, more studies have been published. And so the purpose of this video is not so much to defend polyvagal theory or to refute Grossman's critique. We will leave that up to them. But rather, what we want to do is show exactly what polyvagal theory contributed to RO DBT, what the debate actually contests, and why neither the RO DBT model nor any skill is undermined by this critique. And then we also want to make a note on the ladder theory. Some practitioners have heard the term ladder theory in connection with the polyvagal theory. And this is a popular label for PVT for its three-tier hierarchy. But it is not actually terminology that we use in RO DBT. In RO DBT, we use a 5-simile neuroregulatory framework, which we'll discuss later in the video. Okay, so part 2, what is polyvagal theory? According to Porges, it's the heart of the theory is a simple yet transformative idea. It's our ability to feel safe and connect with others is biologically embedded in the structure and function of our autonomic nervous system. And so Stephen Porges developed his theory from 1994 onwards, and it's based on 3 key principles. It's based on the hierarchy of the autonomic nervous system and the division of the parasympathetic nervous system into a ventral vagal complex and a dorsal vagal complex. And according to this theory, the autonomic nervous system has a primary repertoire of 3 principal states, and these are social engagement, mobilization, and immobilization. And these states functionally and adaptively shift according to how safe we feel at any given moment. And they are linked to the ventral vagal complex, or VVC, which consists of myelinated fibers, and that means that a quick conduction can take place in the fibers. And this is associated with social connection, feeling calm, and openness. Then there's the sympathetic nervous system, which is activated by threat, and it prepares the body for action. This is our fight-flight response. And then there's the dorsal vagal complex, or DVC, which, according to Porges, consists of unmyelinated fibers. That means they conduct information slower than the myelinated fibers. And this is associated with collapse, numbing, and dissociation. The other principle is a term that was coined by Porges called neuroception, and it refers to the unconscious process by which the nervous system evaluates environmental cues for safety or threat without conscious awareness. And then there's the principle of co-regulation. We naturally and unconsciously send signals of safety and danger to each other, which either encourage or discourage the reduction of psychological and physical distance that operationally defines social engagement behaviors. So now let's talk about these 5 disputed claims by Grossman. As I mentioned, it was signed by 39 leading researchers from several big universities. And the first one is that they say that the VVC-DVC functional distinction is not supported as stated. The ventral vagal nucleus ambiguus is involved in mediating both small and large heart rate reactions. And the dramatic shutdown bradycardia that is mediated by the dorsal motor nucleus that is predicted by the polyvagal theory is actually not reliably observed. So they don't believe that the parasympathetic nervous system can be so easily divided into a ventral vagal and dorsal vagal system. Then they say that respiratory sinus arrhythmia does not directly measure vagal tone. And this is something that Porges has used as a measure for vagal tone. However, they say that RSA is actually shaped by respiratory rate, blood pressure, carbon dioxide, age, and sympathetic activity, not vagal outflow alone. So it cannot serve as a direct index of social engagement. They also say that the evolutionary story of the vagus nerve is incorrect. Polyvagal theory claims that the myelinated vagus evolved uniquely in mammals. However, evidence shows that fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds also have myelinated vagal fibers. And these are actually ancient vertebrate features. So it's not unique to humans or mammals. Mammalian social behavior is not uniquely dependent on the VVC. Polyvagal theory ties social engagement capacity specifically to the myelinated VVC as a mammalian innovation, but non-mammalian vertebrates also exhibit rich social behaviors that directly contradict this claim. And then fifth, the polyvagal theory misinterprets earlier foundational physiological literature. And so some key prior studies that are cited by Porges support for polyvagal theory are shown not to support the claims made for them. And polyvagal empirical foundations were built on selective or flawed readings of prior work. So these are the most, the 5 big claims that they dispute. But what the critique does not say, they do not dispute the existence of the vagus nerve, the parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous systems, or the basic ANS distinctions. These can be found in any physiology theory book. It does not dispute that the body responds differently to safety versus threat, or that social connection and co-regulation support well-being. They do not dispute that shutdown, numbing, or emotional attenuation responses are real and clinically significant. And it does not address RO DBT at all. RO DBT is not mentioned anywhere in the paper. So the debate here is quite specific. It's about mechanistic claims. It's not about the behaviors or phenomena that RO DBT is built on. So what is RO DBT actually based on? RO DBT's neuroregulatory model and key mechanism of change are based on research that long predates and or is independent from polyvagal theory. For example, attachment theory and affiliation research. And like Bowlby, Ainsworth, and decades of subsequent work establishing the role of safe social bonds in regulation. It's based on autonomic psychophysiology, the well-established PNS-SNS distinction, that settled anatomy and physiology, fully independent of polyvagal's contested claims. And it's based on social signaling research, such as the role of facial expression, voice prosody, and body posture in communicating safety and trustworthiness. The core mechanism of change of RO DBT is social signaling and social connectedness. And it's none of the core claims depend on polyvagal theory. Okay, so let's now talk about the 5 stimuli neuroregulatory model. RO DBT identifies 5 stimulus categories, each activating a distinct neurobiological response. First, safe and familiar stimuli. That leads to a PNS activation, which is our rest and digest system, and increases openness, affiliation, and social engagement. Next, when there's something novel or ambiguous in the environment, this elicits an orienting response. So there's evaluative attention and mild alertness. What is it? When there's a stimulus in the environment that might be rewarding, this elicits the sympathetic nervous system, specifically the approach motivation part of it, leading to excitation and positive affect. Or when there's a potentially threatening stimulus in the environment, this also leads to sympathetic nervous system activation, but more the fight-flight element of it, and will get reduced social engagement because the body prepares to flee or to fight. And finally, there might be overwhelming threat, which typically occurs when fighting or fleeing doesn't work to get out of the threatening situation. And it leads to shutdown and disengagement, numbing and dissociation. And this is also mediated by the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the polyvagal theory provided convenient labels for states 1 and 5. So state 1 would be associated with the ventral vagal system and state 5 with the dorsal vagal system. But the states themselves are fully established and undisputed. It now appears that perhaps these labels are not correct. So, the honest picture, polyvagal terminology in both books. We want to be transparent about the scope of polyvagal-derived language across both texts. We did a full review. here's what we found. The total matching passages in both books, in the Clinician Book 61 and in the Skills Training Manual 30. The number of times the number of works that were cited, written by Porges, is 8 in the Clinician textbook and 5 in the Skills Training Manual. And the number of times that VVC-DVC was used as a functional shorthand was about 30 in the textbook and 20 in the Skills Training Manual. The number of times an evolutionary claim was made, and in fact there is the very explicit, for example, frogs have a PNS DVC shutdown response to. That is mentioned once in the Clinician textbook and in the Skills Training Manual. And a reference to respiratory sinus arrhythmia as a vagal tone measure is measured once in the Clinician's textbook and not at all in the Skills Training Manual. So the truth is that the VVC-DVC terminology is woven throughout both books as functional shorthand. So now let's go to the right framing. Polyvagal theory gave RO DBT a convenient vocabulary for two well-established autonomic nervous system states, linked to feeling safe and feeling overwhelmed. That vocabulary is used throughout both books as shorthand. What is disputed by Grossman et al. Are the specific mechanistic and evolutionary claims Porges made to explain those states. States themselves, so those of feeling safe or feeling overwhelmed, and every behavior that RO DBT targets around that are entirely undisputed. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into the labels versus the claims. What is and isn't disputed? Okay, so in the RO DBT book, we describe and mention PNS activation relating to social safety, affiliation, and openness. And that's actually undisputed, because the parasympathetic nervous system is known for rest and digest, openness, and those are sort of things. Then overwhelming threat leading to shutdown, numbing, and dissociation again is undisputed, and the impact on RO DBT is known. Social signaling activates the parasympathetic nervous system is undisputed, so the skills that we use are still intact. Skills like slow breath and the closed mouth smile that activate the parasympathetic nervous system again remain undisputed, and so these skills are intact. However, the dorsal vagal complex as a specific human shutdown mechanism, which leading to the bradycardia, a very big drop in heart rate, is disputed by Grossman et al. And it affects us in label only, so the phenomenon itself still exists. The evolutionary DVC claim and the frogs is disputed by Grossman, and what we might need to do is to change the language to refine this in future editions. And finally, RSA as a direct vagal tone measure, which is mentioned once, is disputed by Grossman. It's peripheral and not used clinically, and we can probably remove that statement from the book altogether without any, that it doesn't affect the book or the treatment at all. Okay, what this means in practice. So what stays the same? Every skill in the curriculum, every clinical protocol and target behavior, the 5 stimuli neuroregulatory model, the RCT evidence base for RO DBT, the core mechanism, which is social signaling and connectedness, and the PNS-SNS distinction and all of related skills. What needs updating in future editions of the textbook and the skills manual are the VVC-DVC labels, where we need to change that to more neutral anatomical language, where evolutionary framing isn't essential. The frog evolutionary claim needs to be qualified or removed. And we might need to add a brief contextual note on the polyvagal discussion. So these are all refinements of the scientific language. They are not revisions of the theory or of any clinical skill. So What to Say, a guidance for practitioners and trainers. It may be that clients or fellow clinicians challenge you on and may believe or have heard that RODBT is based on polyvagal theory. So we've just put together a couple of possible responses. And we also want to say that if you prefer not to use terms like VBC and DBC, that is completely reasonable. Just refer to the behavioral responses instead. The clinical meaning is identical. These behaviors still happen in clients. So if you're asked about the polyvagal controversy, you can say something like, well, RODBT references polyvagal terminology throughout both books as convenient shorthand for well-established ANS states. The scientific debate concerns the specific mechanistic story behind those labels, not the states themselves and not any RODBT skill. But we take the critique seriously, and we will refine the relevant language in future editions of the RODBT textbook and skills manual. And if someone asks, is the ladder theory still valid? Then you can respond by saying, well, the ladder theory is a popular label for polyvagal's three-tier hierarchy, but it is not RODBT's model or terminology. RODBT uses a 5-stimuli neuroregulatory framework based on psychophysiological research that predates and is independent from polyvagal theory. And finally, if you're being asked, is RODBT still evidence-based? Then yes, the evidence base for RODBT, including the RCTs, is entirely unaffected by this discussion. The phenomena the model targets are real and well supported in the broader literature independent of polyvagal theory. So here are our 5 key takeaways, and we'll get Erica to help us read these.
Okay, thanks, Roelie. Just before I read the first one, well done. You helped me understand a lot more clearly what's in the critique and how it affects us. So that was really helpful. Thank you. So the 5 key takeaways. The first one is the Grossman critique is legitimate science. It identifies 5 specific disputed claims within polyvagal theory: mechanistic, anatomical, evolutionary, comparative, and epistemological. We do take it seriously.
Yes, and as I said, so polyvagal theory gave RODBT a vocabulary for linking neuroanatomy to well-established psychological states. That vocabulary is used throughout both books, and we are transparent about this.
The debate targets the mechanistic story behind the labels, not the phenomena, the behaviors, or any clinical skill. RODBT does not rely on polyvagal theory. RODBT's hypothesized key mechanism of change is through improving social signaling.
And future editions of the RODBT textbook and skills manual will refine language where polyvagal theory's disputed claims are not essential. So it's a refinement, but not a revision.
RODBT's neuroregulatory theory and its key mechanism of change are living theories we continue to develop and refine. We are confident these are not undermined by this debate. Practitioners can continue with full confidence. RODBT is supported by multiple randomized and other clinical trials, and you can see the paper by Hatum and Burton in 2024 for a full review.
Okay. Well, that was it. Thank you for listening, and we hope you found this helpful.
And if you have any questions, then you can always drop Roelie and I a note on our emails, roelie@radicallyopen.net or erica@radicallyopen.net. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.